Hello and welcome friends. In Unit 1, up till now we have covered the definition of services. We have talked about the different types of service industries. We talked about the global trends, and we have seen how the contribution of service in the economy of not only the Western countries but also developing countries like India and China has been increasing over the years. And we also saw that there are several reasons behind this particular phenomena, and in the last session that we talked about these reasons. Right, today we are going to discuss the different classification of services. Now I have started with primary and secondary. What do we mean by this? Please understand, this is not a classification of services. Please understand, services are tertiary sector. So I have just mentioned primary and secondary so that you can understand that there are basically three sectors, and the first one is known as the primary sector. The second one is secondary sector. You know already that primary sector is related to agriculture and allied activities, mining and quarrying, while secondary is all about manufacturing, right? On the other hand, if you talk about services basically come under the tertiary sector, right? Tertiary sector. And nowadays, however, services are not only considered to be part of tertiary sector, but they are also considered to be part of quaternary as well as quinary sectors, right? So we'll be talking about them in detail, don't worry. As far as the tertiary sector services are concerned, they are basically domestic services, right, which are generally required by individual customers. Have a look at these kind of services. Hair styling, going to a barber shop and getting a haircut done for you, for yourself. This is hair styling. Tailoring, now these are known as tertiary services. Laundry services, we have talked about what laundry services mean. Clothing, washing of clothes. Then we have got repair and maintenance services. You go to a maintenance workshop when your bike breaks down or scooty breaks down, so that is an example of a repair and maintenance service. Or for example, when your mobile starts malfunctioning, you go to a repair shop, so that is an example of repair and maintenance service, and that is part of tertiary service. Again, hotels and restaurants, when you eat out with your friends or family, or when you go and visit some other places, you stay in a hotel. These are all examples of domestic services, right? But services, as I said already, they can also be classified as quaternary services, right? Primary is the first level, secondary is the second, tertiary is the third, and quaternary is the fourth level, right? So what are these kind of services? Trade and commerce related services are grouped into quaternary services. Now what do we mean by them? Please understand, trade and commerce services which are required in businesses, which are required by commercial organizations, commercial enterprises. Transportation services, right? Communication services, retailing. Then we have got banking, insurance, construction and government services. They are all considered part of the quaternary sector, which is basically another categorization of services. So we have got two types of services that we've discussed already: the tertiary services and then the quaternary services, right? So we have already discussed, I hope, retailing we have discussed in the earlier sessions. We talk about companies like Big Bazaar, and in case of Pithaurgarh you talk about By Chance. So that is an example of organized retail, but of course the Parchun Walas which are there in your neighborhood, they are also example of retail stores. They are also examples of retailing, right? Then we've got transportation service. The Uttarakhand Roadways is providing you transportation services. Communication services, for example, Vodafone Idea is providing you communication service, or for example Airtel or BSL for that matter, they are providing you communication services. Banking and insurance, you know already, there are PSU banks, then there are private banks, and then within private banks there are foreign banks, right? So we have got a Punjab National Bank which is a PSU, then you have got an ICICI which is basically a private bank but it belongs to India, and then we have got a Deutsche Bank or a Citibank, which is basically a foreign bank, right? So these services are provided by these banks, and this is an example of quaternary service. Again, insurance, not only health insurance, not only life insurance, which is generally purchased by individual customers, but we are also talking here about, for example, fire insurance, about marine insurance, which is purchased by business organizations. So business organizations can insure themselves against fire and damage from fire by getting a fire insurance, right? Or maybe when they are sending across a product through the sea route, they can get the shipment insured. So that again is an example of insurance. So these kind of services are required. Then we've got the construction services. Now please understand, it is among the sectors in India which generate employment for a very large chunk of our people. Construction sector, right? Maybe the small houses that we generally build, or maybe the big buildings or the commercial space like malls. Wherever construction takes place, these kind of construction services are required. And then we've got the government services. We have talked about them. We talked about maintenance of law and order, providing electricity. For example, in Uttarakhand, if you have a look at it, UPCL Uttarakhand Power Corporation Limited is the company which basically distributes. It's a distributor company, and it distributes electricity supply to households. So that again is a government agency, so this can be said to be a government service. Again, government provides other kind of services like health, education. We have talked about the district hospital, which is nothing but provision of health services by the government. And we have got the degree college of Pithoragarh, which is again an example of how government is providing education services also. So these kind of services would be clubbed into quaternary services, right? Now have a look at the quinary. Quinary means the fifth level. Now quinary is basically referring to those kind of services which help in refining and extending human capacities, which help human beings improve their understanding, increase their awareness levels, increase their knowledge quotient. So these kind of services are known as refining quinary services, right? For example, education and research. So basically, if you look at the research which took place to invent the vaccine against corona, that can be the research services, not the vaccine as a product, but the research services would be an example of a quinary service. Again, health and recreation, that would be an example of quinary service, because these help you improve your potential, improve your physical capacity. So they could be examples of quinary services. Fine. So these are broad classifications. Now please understand, as I mentioned already, I am mentioning the same thing again. Primary and secondary, they are not classification of service, but I have mentioned here just to make you understand that just like we have tertiary sector, which is service sector, we also have primary and secondary sector. The classification starts from here. So what you are going to write on your exam, you have to write it in this particular fashion, that the services are classified as tertiary, as quaternary, and as quinary, right? Now let's have a look at another kind of classification. So there are different types of classification. So now let's have a look at classification from a slightly different perspective. Now have a look at this. Equipment based or people based. What do we mean by this? Have a look at this particular picture. In both the pictures, foot massage is taking place. Now please understand, this is a service. Once you get a foot massage, you do not own anything. And you cannot also weigh foot massage. How much does it weigh? You cannot see. You cannot touch foot massage, for example. So these are all services, right? But foot massage can be provided by a machine also. This is a massager machine, and this is being provided by a human masseur. So this is an example of equipment based services. This is an example of human people based services, right? Now provided in client's presence or absence. Some of the services can be provided in your absence also, and some services require the client to be present. The client basically is the customer who is consuming the services. Have a look at this particular tattoo making. If you want to get yourself a tattoo, you simply will have to be present at the time when this particular service is being provided to you. On the other hand, if you want to book puja, let's say in Badrinath or Kedarnath, right? The puja can be performed on your behalf even if you're not present. Have a look at the lines written here, as per COVID-19 pandemic guidelines, they can book online puja through this portal, right, which would be performed on their behalf, which means the client does not need to be available. And this is a very good example of how you can convert challenges into opportunities, problems into opportunities. What happened because of the corona pandemic in 2021 as well as in 2020, the Char Dham Yatra was simply not allowed. But then how do you earn your revenues? So what Uttarakhand government did was they started making these services available online. Now what you can do is, if you are interested in performing worship in Kedarnath, you cannot go there because of the corona pandemic. So what we can do is, you can book your puja and the priest would perform the puja on your behalf, right? And you don't need to be present there. So this is an example of a service which is being provided in the absence of the client also. Now have a look at this one. Personal service or business service. We have discussed this earlier also. Personal services which are provided to individual retail customers, right? On the other hand, business services which are provided to the businesses, right? So personal services basically are provided by businesses, but they are being provided to the customers. Have a look at this. When you want to get your mobile repaired, so basically this is an example of a personal service. Now please understand, this is a Samsung outlet, Samsung service station, and they've got different people who are taking care of this task of servicing the different mobile phones. So this is an example of a personal service. On the other hand, business service is basically B2B. We talked about the advertising services. I hope you remember in the last session. We talked about advertising services. We talked about the merchant banking, right? So these were example of business services. For example, customer support, IT help desk, right? Telemarketing services. So for example, there's a particular company which needs somebody to telemarket its products, and they do not want to do it on their own because they do not have that kind of expertise or they do not have that kind of resources. So what will they do? They will hire some other company, and this is what is happening with India also nowadays. So many BPO firms have come up. So there are countries like America and there are companies there who want customer support for their customers. For example, let's say an American firm has sold fridges and they want that the customers be provide all necessary support whenever they are installing those fridges, but they do not want to have their own people supporting the customer, having their own people answering the queries raised by the customer. So what will they do? They will assign this task to a business process outsourcing firm in India, and the business process outsourcing firm in India would perform these customer support services on the behalf of this American company, and they would provide these services to the American company's customer on their behalf, right? So this is an example of B2B service or business service. And let's talk about another classification which is based on whether the service provider is a private firm, private organization, or it is a public organization. We have talked about this earlier also. These defense services are provided by government, a public organization, right? On the other hand, have a look at this also. Now these guards which this particular company provides to various business establishments, to various residential complexes, this is an example of a private service provider. So they provide security guards. Now this particular company is the service provider, and they provide these security guards to various banks or to residential colonies. There are multi-story. Now you can have a look at these kind of multi-story residential colonies in the background also. So they provide these guards to these kind of colonies, and there are some commercial complexes like malls. So there also they provide these services, but the service provider here is a private enterprise. I'll give you another example. If you talk about Airtel, this is a private service provider. On the other hand, if you talk about BSNL or MTNL, this is an example of a public service provider. So this is another way of classifying the services. Thank you very much for your time.